They work while the world sleeps, but what they're guarding isn't always human. On the night shift, silence hides footsteps, and voices echo in empty buildings. These 3 stories show that in some places, security is just an illusion. The early hours on campus were always silent, the kind of silence that made your thoughts drift slowly, filling in the gaps between one sound and another. During the day, the place was a chaos of voices, laughter, and hurried footsteps. But at night, the campus belonged to the shadows. I was used to it. A security guard's night shift was nothing more than a repetitive routine. Walking from one building to another, checking doors, making sure no drunken students tried to get in where they shouldn't have. Monotonous, predictable, and, more often than not, lonely. The only constant sound was the buzzing of the streetlights scattered around the campus, casting long, distorted shadows on the cracked concrete of the sidewalks. The cold wind blew between the buildings, bringing with it the rustling of trees and the rhythmic chirping of crickets. Sometimes I heard footsteps, but there was never anyone there. It was like that every night. I knew that the sound came from the echo of my own boots on the concrete floor, reverberating off the empty walls. Even so, on some occasions, the feeling that I wasn't alone was too strong to ignore. My radio suddenly squawked. The voice of the other security guard on duty sounded distorted by the static. "There's movement in the old building in the East Wing. Can you check it out?" I stopped midway. My first thought was that he was joking. The East Wing had old buildings, most of which had been disused for years. None of them were used anymore. "Which building?" I asked, pressing the radio button. The silence lengthened before I got an answer. "The one at the end of the corridor. The one with the tall windows." I frowned. I knew that campus well, and I was sure there was no building there. But for some reason, my chest tightened with an unease that was hard to explain. I swallowed and headed towards the East Wing. The wind seemed colder. The night was darker, and as I approached the end of the corridor, a building I had never seen before was there, waiting for me. The wind blew harder as I approached the East Wing. The building was there, tall, imposing, as if it had always existed. But something was wrong. I had never seen that structure before, and that in itself was disturbing. My radio squawked again, bringing me back to the present. Movement detected in the abandoned East Wing building. "The dispatcher's voice sounded strange, hesitant, as if she herself wasn't sure what she was saying. "Can you confirm the call?" I hesitated for a second, looking at that building, its aged facade reflecting the dim light from the street lamps. The concrete looked cracked in places, and the windows, tall and dark, were like empty eyes watching me. "I confirm. I'm going to check," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. Silence. For a moment, only the hum of the radio filled the air, followed by a low, drawn-out noise, almost like a muffled whisper. "Negative unit. We have no record of this building in the East Wing." My breath caught in my throat. The operator seemed confused. She had clearly given me the call seconds before, but now she was talking as if the building didn't exist. I blinked, looking at the imposing structure before me. It was there. Real. Concrete. So why did the center say otherwise? I remembered the stories that circulated among the campus security guards about an old building that had been condemned for decades. One that no one dared enter. They said that strange phenomena happened in there. Lights flashing without explanation, doors slamming by themselves, shadows moving in the empty corridors. But that's all it was. Stories. At least that's what I always thought. I swallowed and squeezed the flashlight in my hand. I had to check. I took the first step. The wind grew stronger, almost like a warning, and then the door to the building opened by itself. The wind howled around the building as I climbed the steps to the main entrance. The lights flickered inside. The unsteady glow reflected off the dusty windows, casting flickering shadows that danced down the dark corridor. The effect was strange, almost hypnotic, as if the building was breathing, alive in some way. My hand rested on the handle of the double wooden door. It wasn't locked. The weight of the door gave way easily, creaking with a long, drawn-out sound. A strong smell of dust and mold hit me hard, heavy, suffocating, as if the place had been closed for decades. The air seemed dense, trapped in time. I took the first step inside. The corridor stretched out before me, plunged into darkness. The only illumination came from the flashing lights on the ceiling, which went on and off at irregular intervals. I'd seen abandoned buildings before, but this one looked different. The floor was covered in a thin layer of dust, and yet I had the strange feeling that I wasn't the first person to pass through there that night. My chest tightened. Something was wrong. With every step, my senses screamed at me to turn around. It was a primitive instinct, something I couldn't ignore. I lifted the flashlight and slid the beam along the corridor. Nothing. Just closed doors on both sides, old metal signs indicating classrooms and laboratories. Some of them were slightly ajar, as if someone had left them that way. The silence was overwhelming. And then, in the distance, at the end of the corridor, I saw movement. My hand squeezed the flashlight tightly. Whatever it was had disappeared too quickly, but for an instant, I could have sworn it was a shadow. And it wasn't mine. The air inside the building was heavy, suffocating. The smell of old dust mixed with mold permeated my nostrils, as if the place had been forgotten by time. The flashlight flickered slightly in my hand as I made my way down the long, dark corridor. The floor beneath my feet was covered in dirt and debris. Yellowed and torn papers were scattered haphazardly as if someone had dropped them in a hurry. Some were administrative documents, others looked like class notes, their letters too faded to read. Something was wrong. The silence inside was absolute, except for the intermittent sound of a drip echoing through the building. Pluck. Pluck. I turned, the flashlight in all directions, trying to find the leak. There was no tap open, no exposed pipes, no damp spots on the ceiling, and yet, the sound continued. Plock. Plock. My shoulders slumped. The feeling that I was not alone began to grow. I passed through an ajar door and saw a room illuminated by fluorescent light that flickered erratically. The unstable glow cast angular shadows on the walls, creating shapes that seemed to move. Whenever I looked away, I hesitated before entering. The room was empty. Old tables were covered in dust, chairs overturned, as if they had been hastily abandoned. But what made me uneasy was a blackboard at the back of the room. The surface was clean, except for a single word scrawled in white chalk, written in a hurried manner: "Do not open." My heart raced. Before I could process it, a noise came from upstairs. Footsteps. My breath caught. They were slow, dragging, but they had weight. Someone was up there, but that was impossible. The building must have been abandoned for years. The campus registry itself confirmed it. I gripped the flashlight tighter, feeling cold sweat trickle down the back of my neck. My instinct was screaming at me to get out of there, but something made me stay. And then the footsteps stopped. Directly above me, my skin was covered in a thin layer of cold sweat. The footsteps upstairs had stopped. The silence inside the building was absolute, the kind of silence that pressed against your ears, heavy, as if the very air around me was contained, holding its breath along with me. I should have turned around. At that moment, I should have left that place and forgotten that this night had happened. But my feet kept moving. The corridor in front of me seemed to stretch on longer than it should. The lights flickered irregularly, casting flickering shadows across the weather-stained walls. The smell of dust and mold was now cut by something different, something icy and damp, like air from a forgotten basement. Then the door at the end of the corridor slammed on its own. The sound echoed violently, reverberating throughout the building. I stopped immediately, my heart hammering against my ribs. The door hadn't just slammed shut, it had been slammed hard, as if someone wanted to stop me from going any further. My hand went to the radio on my belt. Central. I'm in the east wing of the disused building. There's something here. The answer was only static. Central? Can someone copy me? More static. Something about it seemed strange. It wasn't just white noise. There was a muffled sound in the background, a hiss that resembled a distant whisper. Body went rigid. The warmth in the room began to fade. I felt the change in the air instantly. A sharp chill spread through the corridor, and when I let out a breath, I saw my own breath condensed into small white clouds. The building, once stuffy and suffocating, was now freezing. The radio squawked once more, followed by a strange sound, as if someone was trying to speak, but too far away to be understood. And then, behind me, I heard a metallic noise, the unmistakable sound of a chair being dragged. The icy air pressed against my chest. I turned on an impulse, the flashlight trembling in my hand. The corridor behind me was empty, but there were marks on the floor, as if something had been moved, right there just a few seconds ago. My breathing was heavy when I reached the ajar door of the room. The cold still enveloped the room, and every step I took seemed to be absorbed by the building's deep silence. The sound of the chair being dragged still echoed in my mind, although now the corridor behind me was completely empty. The flashlight flickered slightly in my hand as I carefully pushed the door open. It gave way with a long, drawn-out creak. The room seemed to have been abandoned in a hurry. There was a wallet lying in the middle of the floor, tipped over in a way that suggested someone had stood up abruptly. Yellowed papers were scattered around, some crumpled, others torn, as if a mess had occurred in there. The smell of dust and damp seemed stronger in that space, but what really made me freeze was the reflection in the glass of the old blackboard at the back of the room. A shadow, standing at the end of the corridor, motionless. My muscles tensed and a shiver ran down the back of my neck. The reflection showed a tall, indistinct figure standing outside watching me. I could feel it. My throat went dry and pure fear gripped my body. The reflection was there, but when I turned to look directly down the corridor, there was nothing. The air became even heavier. The lights began to flicker violently, flooding the room in flashes of white and shadow. My heart raced. The pulse of my flashlight wavered along with the lights, and then, for a split second, I saw it. In the darkest corner of the room, a figure was sitting with its back to me. It didn't move. It made no sound. But something about it, something made me feel an indescribable terror. My mouth opened to say something, perhaps to ask if anyone was there, but a wave of absolute dread overwhelmed me. I shouldn't have been there. Suddenly, the lights went out for good. Absolute blackness engulfed the room. My chest rose and fell unevenly as my hand gripped the flashlight tightly, frantically trying to turn it on. Nothing. The button gave way under my finger, but there was no response. The silence was deep, suffocating. I knew I wasn't alone. Then the radio squawked. The sound tore through the darkness like a warning, static mixing with low, distorted noises, and then a voice whispered, "Get out!" My whole body froze. It wasn't anyone's voice from the central office. A shiver ran down my spine. I didn't think. Adrenaline exploded in my chest, and my legs moved before my mind could react. I ran. I ran out of the room and back into the corridor, panting. The cold was still intense, and with every step, the sound of something behind me grew closer. It wasn't an echo. The footsteps weren't in sync with mine. My heart was beating so hard it hurt. The corridor seemed longer than before. The doors of the rooms passed me by like indistinct shadows, but the end of the road never seemed to get any closer. With each step, the sound behind me intensified. The air around me became even colder, and the sensation of something being too close was unbearable. I pushed my muscles to the limit, feeling my boots slip on the dirty floor. I had to get out of there. Then finally, I saw it. The exit door. My hands gripped the handle in desperation, and I pushed hard. The cold early morning breeze hit my face like a punch, but before I took the last step out, I looked back. The shadow was there, in the middle of the corridor. Still, tall, immobile, staring straight at me. Its outlines flickered under the flashing lights, a dark blur against the faded background of the building, and then the lights failed for good. The building plunged into darkness, and I ran away. The cold early morning air burned my lungs as I ran away from the entrance. My hands were still shaking as I pulled the radio from my waistband and pressed the button hard. "Central! I need reinforcements in the East Wing, now!" The silence on the other end of the radio lasted longer than it should have. Then a pop and static. "Say again, unit. Where are you?" I swallowed, my heart still pounding. "In the East Wing. I had an incident in the abandoned building." My voice faltered, my breath short. "Block 7. This time the answer came quickly. "Unit, you must be mistaken." A pause. Hesitation. "There is no Block 7 there. That building was demolished 10 years ago." My body froze. A shiver went up my spine in a way that wasn't just fear. It was absolute dread. I squeezed the radio harder, as if to make sure I was hearing correctly. That can't be right. I was in there. My gaze automatically turned back, and my blood ran cold. There was no building, the imposing structure, the dark corridors, the room with the fallen wallet. Nothing was there anymore. What was left in front of me was just an empty lot, covered in tall weeds and old debris, as if nothing had existed there in years. My legs wobbled and I felt my body shudder. The cold was still all around me, but now it was coming from inside me. I had been there. I touched my shoulder, feeling the dust still clinging to my uniform. I had breathed in that musty air. I'd heard the sounds. I had felt the icy touch of that invisible presence. None of it had been my imagination. But now, it was as if the building had never existed. The radio squawked again, and the operator's voice sounded uncertain. "Unit, are you all right? What's going on?" My throat was dry. I took one last look at the empty space in front of me. The wind was blowing hard, swaying the undergrowth among the forgotten rubble. I took a deep breath. I'm getting out of here, and without looking back, I walked away from what shouldn't have been there. Over the next few days, I did everything I could to try and understand what had happened that night. But every answer I found only made it worse. I talked to some of the older staff on campus, trying to keep a low profile. I didn't want them to think I was going crazy, but the truth was that I needed an explanation. It was one of the janitors, a gentleman called Martinez, who finally told me what I didn't want to hear. "Block 7? He repeated, frowning. "This building caught fire 10 years ago." My stomach churned, but I remained still, waiting for him to continue. "The fire started in the middle of the night. Nobody knows exactly what happened, but the flames spread quickly." He paused, scratching, his chin as if searching for old memories. "They managed to evacuate most of the staff, but a teacher was trapped on the top floor, the same floor where I had heard the footsteps." I swallowed. "They say he tried to get out, but the fire blocked all the exits. By the time the firemen arrived, it was too late." Martinez's voice became lower, almost a whisper. There was very little left of him. And the building? Well, the structure didn't hold up. They demolished it shortly afterwards. My chest heaved. The image of that shadow standing in the corridor, looking straight at me, came back to my mind with force. But the strange thing is that some of the security guards before you have already reported different things. I looked up quickly. Calls on the radio, the sound of footsteps in the middle of the night. The blood ran cold in my veins. "And the radio," he continued, his voice almost cracking. "Always the same time. 2:43 in the morning." My body froze. That was the exact time I had received that call that night. And since then, every morning, my radio has started to beep on its own. No voice, no command from the central station, just static, always at the same time, always reminding me that I should never have entered that building. Working the early shift in a convenience store was a mixture of peace and absolute boredom. Some evenings were busy, with truckers stopping for a quick coffee and teenagers laughing in the aisles as they chose energy drinks and snacks. But most of the time, Silence was my only customer. The store was at an isolated point on the road. At night, there were few passing cars, their headlights cutting through the darkness for a few seconds before disappearing around the next bend. The parking lot rarely had more than one vehicle, and the whole store seemed to exist in a pocket of time where nothing really happened. I got used to it. The products on the shelves were perfectly aligned because hardly anyone touched them. The floor was always clean, reflecting the cold light of the fluorescent panels that flashed from time to time, casting momentary shadows across the aisles. The fridge at the back of the store hummed low, a constant, almost comforting noise, breaking the silence just enough so that I didn't feel completely alone. But some nights, when tiredness was building up and my eyes were burning with sleep, the silence seemed too heavy. Sometimes I would hear a soft rustling between the shelves, a sound too discreet to be the wind, but which disappeared whenever I looked. At other times, the screen of the security monitor would flicker for a second, as if there was some interference, but it would return to normal before I could focus properly. I never paid much attention. Prolonged solitude plays tricks on the mind. I followed the routine. I made my coffee, checked the stock, checked the till receipts. I just waited for the morning to arrive as usual, and then he walked in, at exactly 2:47 in the morning. I didn't know it yet, but he would be back every night. The first time he came in, I didn't pay much attention. He was just another customer in the middle of the night walking slowly through the corridors, his face partially hidden by the dark hood he was wearing. It wasn't unusual. Some people avoided eye contact, just wanted a place to kill time before moving on. But then he came back, and he came back the next night and the next, always at 2:47 in the morning. At first, I thought it was a coincidence, but as the days went by, I began to notice the pattern. He never bought anything. He never approached the cashier. He never spoke a word. He would enter through the automatic door, walk slowly to the frozen food aisle and stop there for a few minutes, as if he was looking for something. But he never opened the freezers. He never even touched the products. Then, without warning, he would turn and leave. At first, I tried to ignore it. Some people were strange, and I'd seen everything there. Drunks who could barely stand, walkers seeking shelter from the cold, drivers who stopped only to take a breath before continuing their journey. But he was different. There was something about the way he walked, the calculated steps, too slow, almost rehearsed. There was something about the way he ignored me, as if he knew I was there, but chose not to acknowledge me. On the 5th or 6th night, I began to feel real discomfort. I watched through the security monitors as he walked down the frozen food aisle, the white lights reflecting his silhouette in the glass of the freezers. I can't say why, but the sight made me shudder. Something felt wrong. And then I realized what it was. Every time I looked away for a second, he seemed to come a little closer. A small detail, imperceptible at first glance. But when I realized it, I couldn't ignore it any longer. That night, for the first time, I waited for him to leave. And as soon as he walked through the automatic door, I ran to the monitors and rewound the recording. What I saw made me lose sleep for the rest of the night. The night was sweltering, not because of the heat. The store was cold, sterile, lit by the fluorescent lamps that flashed occasionally. But there was a heaviness in the air, a presence that I couldn't shake from my mind. He came in at 2:47 as usual. I was already waiting. This time, I decided I wouldn't look away. I pretended to be organizing the cigarettes behind the counter, but my attention was on him. He passed through the automatic door without hesitation and headed straight for the frozen food aisle, his steps slow and meticulous. The cold light reflected off his silhouette as he stopped in front of the freezer, his head tilted slightly towards the glass. I waited for him to move. I waited for him to pick something up, to take a step to the side, to act like any normal person would. But he didn't move. I felt a shiver run down my spine, a primitive instinct warning me that there was something fundamentally wrong with the scene. And then for a second, I looked away, just for a second. The hum of the fridge got louder. When I looked at it again, my heart sank in my chest. He was getting closer. Not much, just a step, a subtle shift. but enough for me to be sure that I didn't see him move. I swallowed, trying to convince myself that it was all in my head. I turned to pick up a piece of paper next to the till and another second. When I looked again, he was even closer. My stomach churned. My hands were damp against the counter. I forced myself to breathe slowly, but my chest was tight. The same thing happened twice more. I didn't see him walking. I only saw him getting closer. Sweat trickled down the back of my neck. A growing unease took root in me, something that went beyond fear. It was an instinctive, deep dread, as if I were facing something that shouldn't exist. The last time I looked away, just to straighten my apron, I felt my blood run cold in my veins. He was no longer in the corridor. He was at the cashier's entrance, and he was smiling. The next night, I was ready. The shift dragged by, as if time refused to move forward. Every noise in the store seemed amplified. The hum of the refrigerators, the sporadic crack of the wood on the counter, the distant sound of the few cars passing on the road. But what bothered me most was the waiting. I knew he would come, and he did. 12:47. The automatic door opened with a discreet squeak. The cold early morning air rushed in, but it wasn't the icy breeze that sent a shiver down my spine. It was him. The same dark coat, the same meticulous steps, the same pattern. But that night, I wouldn't look away. I observed every detail. The way his shoulders rose slightly with each step. The way his head remained fixed, straight, never looking directly at me. His feet touching the ground unhurriedly, almost as if he were dancing in the wrong time in reality. He made his way to the frozen corridor, but this time, he didn't stop in front of the freezer. He simply stopped, right in the middle of the store. His body remained upright, motionless, and for the first time he didn't seem to be pretending to be looking for something. He knew. He knew I was watching. The air became heavy. My chest tightened. Everything inside me screamed that I shouldn't be doing this, that there were invisible rules being broken. Then he smiled, a slow, calculated smile. A smile that didn't belong on a human face. I couldn't move. My body wanted to react, but fear kept me frozen in place. My breathing became shallow. Sweat ran cold down the back of my neck. He didn't need to say anything. He didn't have to move. His smile said it all. I had discovered something I wasn't supposed to know, and now he knew that I did. He stood there, watching me, waiting, and for the first time, I understood. This wasn't a game. It was a warning. Time became a malleable thing stretching impossibly as I stood there, trapped in that man's fixed gaze. The convenience store, which always had some persistent noise, the hum of the refrigerators, the occasional creak of the shelves or the distant rumble of tires cutting across the road outside, became completely silent. Not an ordinary silence, absolute silence. It was as if the whole world had been swallowed up by a vacuum, as if somehow I was outside reality, trapped in a space where nothing but that moment existed. My own breathing became deafening. I could hear the blood throbbing in my ears, feel the cold sweat dripping down the back of my neck and sticking to the base of my spine. But him? He was still standing motionless in the center of the store, smiling. Fear rose up inside me like a wave about to engulf me. My hands clenched the edge of the counter, my fingers white with tension. I needed to do something. I needed to break that moment. My throat was dry, but I forced my voice out, albeit low and shaky. "What do you want?" The words sounded too small, as if they had been absorbed by the very silence around me. His smile widened a little more. My chest tightened. Something wasn't right. The way he looked at me, it wasn't human. There was no expectation, no intention, no real reaction. It was as if he was just there because he knew he should be. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. My legs were frozen. My body refused to move, as if it knew that looking away now would be an irreversible mistake. Time dragged on a little longer, and then he turned and left. The automatic door opened with a low squeak. And as soon as he disappeared into the darkness, outside, the hum of the refrigerators returned, the road noise returned, and the world seemed real again. But I knew something had been left behind. The next night came, and with it, a strange emptiness. 47 a.m. passed. The automatic door didn't, and the man didn't appear. I should have felt relieved. Finally, that nagging presence was gone. Perhaps he would have moved on, found another place to wander, another balcony to stare at in silence. But as the minutes ticked by and the clock ticked towards 3 in the morning, what grew inside me wasn't relief. It was a suffocating restlessness. It was as if something was wrong in a way I couldn't name. The refrigerators were still humming. The sound of the road still came and went, as far away as ever. The store was exactly as it should be. But I couldn't ignore the feeling that there was a hole in reality, something that should have happened and didn't. My fingers trembled a little as I pulled up the recording from the security camera. Perhaps it was an irrational need to prove to myself that everything was normal. Fast-forwarded the video to 2:45. The store was empty. 46. Still nothing. 47. The screen flickered for a second, a slight digital noise that could have gone unnoticed. But when the image returned, my stomach churned. The man hadn't come through the door. He was already there. Standing there, behind me. My whole body went rigid. I squeezed my eyes shut, holding my breath as the video continued. There I was, sitting on the counter, my eyes fixed on the monitor. Without realizing that, just a few steps away, he was standing behind my shoulder, bent over, looking at the same screen I was seeing now. The air became heavy. That feeling that something had been left behind the night before was right. He never left. My hands were cold, trembling. The air around me felt dense, heavy, as if every particle of oxygen carried an invisible weight that was pulling me down. I couldn't stop staring at the screen. The footage kept looping in front of me. I rewound, paused, moved forward frame by frame, trying to find a rational explanation for what I was seeing. He never came through the door. Time passed. The minutes ticked by. And then he was there. Behind me. Immobile. As if he had always been. Panic rose in my throat, suffocating me. My lungs struggled for air as my mind tried to find any justification. A mistake in the recording? A glitch in the cameras? A hallucination caused by tiredness? But then, without meaning to, my fingers touched the keyboard and opened the live monitor. And he was there again. Behind me. Now. The sight hit me like an electric shock. My image was on the screen, the pale reflection of the cold light illuminating my face in real time. And a few centimeters away, a dark, slender silhouette standing so close that I should have felt its breath on the back of my neck. But there was no heat. There was no sound. The store was absolutely silent, as it had been the night before, as if the world had been switched off around us. My heart was pounding against my chest. My body was screaming at me to run, to get out of there before it was too late. But what if I turned around? What if he was really there? My eyes burned, my vision blurred. I was trembling, my muscles stiffening. But then, on the monitor, he moved. His head tilted slowly to the side, as if he knew I was watching, as if he wanted me to see. My lungs froze. And then he smiled. The monitor blinked. The dry sound of static reverberated through the absolute silence of the store, and then the image went out for a whole second. My breath caught in my chest. When the screen came back on, he was no longer there. My eyes scanned the security monitor, sliding from one corner of the store to the other. Nothing. No sign of his presence. But the weight of something watching me remained. That thick, suffocating feeling, rooted in my bones, as if a pair of invisible eyes were fixed on me. My hands trembled as I put down the mouse and raised my face, my eyes slowly turning to the glass of the automatic door. The road was empty. The lights of the parking lot cast a pale glow over the asphalt, the early morning mist floating low over the ground. But something was wrong. The reflection of the store was there. The shelves, the counter, the fluorescent lights still flashing. But my reflection, it wasn't right. I kept looking forward, my body frozen with fear. But the reflection wasn't doing the same. My image in the glass was slightly off. Not just a subtle delay. She was looking straight at me. My mouth went dry. My body tingled, a primitive instinct screaming inside my mind. The reflection tilted its head slowly, as if studying my reaction. The gesture was familiar, identical to what the man had done on the monitor. My lungs burned, my legs threatened to weaken, and then my reflection smiled, a smile identical to his. Too wide, wrong. My hands were firmly on the counter, my fingers gripping the wooden top. But in the glass, the reflection of my hand slowly began to open, the fingers pulling apart as if someone was releasing something invisible. Panic boiled up inside me, because I wasn't moving. The glass of the door shook slightly, and then the reflection stepped forward. The next day was a blur. I returned home with my nerves on edge, my body tense as if I was still trapped inside that convenience store, as if the night had never really ended. I tried to convince myself that it was a trick of the mind, the night shift, the loneliness, the accumulated exhaustion. All this could have created an illusion, a side effect of tiredness. But something inside me didn't believe that, because when I woke up, I could still feel that presence. It wasn't visible, it didn't make a sound, but it was waiting. I tried to act normally. I washed my face, drank coffee, avoided looking at any reflective surface for too long. But when I went to the bathroom and looked in the mirror, my heart froze for a moment. My eyes were a little late. It was almost imperceptible, just a fraction of a second difference. But I knew it. I knew it. I hurried out the door, took a deep breath, tried to erase it from my mind. But as the day wore on, the store windows, the windows of parked cars, the faint reflections on cell phone screens, they all seemed to contain something I didn't want to see, something I hoped would be noticed again. By the time I returned for the night shift, my paranoia had taken over. Every time I passed the security monitors, I felt goosebumps rise on my skin. I avoided looking directly. But that wasn't the worst thing. The worst thing was realizing that I no longer blinked as often, because deep down, there was a thought eating away at me. If I blinked, what if, when I opened my eyes, he was closer? Working the night shift has never been a problem for me. I've always liked the quiet that comes with empty corridors and floors lit only by emergency lights. The corporate building where I work as a security guard has 30 floors, all occupied by offices, meeting rooms, and some technical facilities. During the day, it's an anthill of people. Suits scurrying around, keyboards clacking, meetings taking place behind frosted glass doors. But at night, it turns into something completely different. I can't explain it. There's a silence that goes beyond the ordinary, a kind of emptiness that creeps through the corridors, as if the building were breathing slowly and deeply. The fluorescent lights in the reception area flicker from time to time, emitting a low hum that mixes with the occasional hiss of my radio. This sound is practically my only company until the clock strikes 6 in the morning and the world starts moving again. I'm not superstitious, but I've heard stories about this building. Employees talk in whispers about strange things, lights that turn on by themselves on empty floors, printers that fire off reports without anyone having triggered them, shadows reflected in office windows when no one is there. A janitor once told me that there are doors that, if opened at night, lead to rooms that don't exist during the day. He laughed after telling it, as if it were a joke, but his face said otherwise. Today, however, there is something different in the air, an uncomfortable feeling that has been with me since I started my shift. Maybe it's just tiredness. The dawn is moving slowly, and the hands of the clock seem to drag the minutes with a cruel insistence. I sit in the security room and leave, the monitors on, watching the grainy image from the security cameras. So far, everything seems normal. Just the usual emptiness, until the radio squawks louder than usual, and a distorted voice calls my name. The radio squawked again, this time louder, as if someone was trying to adjust the frequency. The rasping sound cut through the silence of the room, and for a moment I thought it was just interference. But then the voice came, muffled, distorted, as if it were being transmitted from somewhere far away or through a faulty channel. Elevator. Stopped. Underground. I frowned and pressed the radio button to answer. Repeat. I didn't copy correctly. The static sound intensified for a few seconds before the voice came back, this time a little clearer. The elevator. Stuck underground. No response from the panel. I squinted, trying to understand what I was hearing. There was no basement in that building. The most we had below the first floor was the parking garage, and even then, the elevators didn't go down there. I got up from my chair and walked over to the control desk, opening the central panel of the security system. I scrolled down to the elevator monitoring tab and looked at the list of available floors. The display showed the position of each one, in real time. 3 were on the first floor, 1 on the 8th floor, and another. The 5th elevator was marked, stopped, underground. My fingers stiffened on the keyboard. Something didn't make sense. I'd been working there long enough to know that there was no basement recorded on the building's maps. I took a deep breath and pressed the button to call the system operator. The technician's voice answered on the second ring, sounding as confused as I was. "Is there a problem at the exchange?" I asked, keeping my eyes fixed on the screen. "I see here. The system is saying that one of the elevators has gone down to a floor that doesn't exist," he replied, his voice laced with hesitation. "That can't be right." That's what I thought. Some fault in the system? I heard the sound of keys being pressed on the other end of the line. It shouldn't be possible. The building's programming doesn't allow the elevators to access a floor that isn't registered. But he paused. The curious thing is that the weight sensors indicate that there is something inside the elevator. My hands got cold. Something, or someone? The line was silent for a moment too long. "I'll try resetting the system, forcing the elevator back to the first floor. If it's an error, that should fix the problem. But honestly, I've never seen that happen before." I stood still for a moment, listening to the low sound of the server fans in the security room. Something about that situation bothered me deeply, a primitive instinct whispering that there was something very wrong. I looked at the surveillance monitors and selected the internal camera of the stuck elevator. The screen flashed and then, for a moment, the image was filled with digital noise. When it finally stabilized, I felt a shiver run down my spine. In the center of the cabin, illuminated by a dim, flashing light, there was a motionless silhouette. Someone was waiting. The image flickered on the screen, covered by static noises that gradually dissipated, revealing the interior of the stationary elevator. The cabin was illuminated by a yellowish light, flickering from time to time, as if it were struggling to stay lit. But nothing in the poor lighting could explain what I saw in the center of the elevator. A figure stood there. It wasn't exactly a person. It was something. A shapeless shadow, dark as the bottom of an endless pit, occupied the space between the metal walls. There were no defined contours, no visible details. Just a dense, immobile presence, as if it were waiting for the doors to open. My breathing became heavier. My eyes remained fixed on the screen, searching for a logical explanation, trying to find an error in the camera, a fault in the transmission. Perhaps it was a contrast problem, perhaps a distorted reflection. But it wasn't. I knew it wasn't. The radio crackled again, and the operator's voice broke the suffocating silence. "I'm trying to restart the system. But there's something strange. The elevator isn't responding to commands. It refuses to leave the basement." I pressed the button to answer, without taking my eyes off the screen. "Do you see what I see?" "See what?" "The elevator camera. There's someone inside." The silence on the other end of the line lasted an uncomfortable amount of time. "What do you mean?" I don't see anything on the sensors, apart from the weight indicated." "Are you sure?" I swallowed. I was sure. The thing inside the elevator remained still. It made no movement, not even a subtle oscillation like a person breathing. It was as if it wasn't subject to the normal rules of a physical body. A shiver ran down my spine when I noticed something even stranger. The image from the camera showed no reflection on the metal walls of the elevator. If it had been a person, there should have been some shadow cast, some indication that there was something there beyond the empty space, but there was nothing. Figures seemed to be outside the cabin space itself, as if it were an error in the real world. The radio crackled once more. The system... Wait, the elevator is going up. My eyes went wide. On the screen, the elevator control panel changed by itself. The numbers passed quickly, from the basement to the second floor, then to the second, and then it stopped on the 13th floor. My hands gripped the arms of the chair tightly. This floor didn't exist. The control panel flashed. The elevator numbers scrolled by themselves, going up without any manual command. The operator muttered something over the radio, his tone laden with confusion and a growing hint of nervousness. This doesn't make sense. I'm restarting the system, but the elevator isn't responding. The buttons are stuck. I kept my eyes fixed on the screen, watching that dark silhouette remain motionless in the middle of the cabin. Not even the elevator's movement seemed to affect it. The system interface flickered, failing intermittently. Lines of corrupted code appeared on the operator's screen. Snippets of commands scrambled, as if something was interfering directly with the controls. The system is crashing, said the operator, his voice lower, as if trying to convince himself that this was just a technical fault. I can't stop the elevator. What do you mean? My own voice came out more tense than I would have liked. It's going up on its own. The cold feeling in the pit of my stomach intensified. This shouldn't be possible. Even if there was a glitch in the software, the elevator could never move without a direct command from the system. But there it was, going up on its own, ignoring any attempt to control it. The numbers on the screen continued to advance. 6th floor, 7th, 8th, faster and faster. What the hell is going on down there? I whispered, not realizing that my breathing was racing. The operator took a deep breath into the radio as if trying to stay calm. I don't know, but this error. He paused briefly. I think the elevator has been on this floor before. A shiver went up the back of my neck. What? I've seen it before. Only... The static cut off his speech for a moment. The system doesn't keep a record. But years ago, a technician mentioned something similar. An elevator that went up by itself. It stopped on the 13th floor. The screen flashed again. The elevator passed the 12th, and then it stopped. The number 13 glowed on the interface, as if mocking the logic of that building. Absolute silence filled the security room. My eyes were fixed on the monitor of the elevator's internal camera. The dark silhouette was still there. But now she was no longer still. Her head had turned slightly upwards, as if she knew I was watching. As if it was waiting. The number 13 glowed on the screen like an error that refused to be erased. The elevator shouldn't be there. The floor shouldn't be there. My mind tried to find a rational explanation, but everything I knew about the structure of the building contradicted what was in front of me. The elevator had gone up on its own, ignoring the operator's commands, and was now standing on a floor that simply didn't exist in the records. The security camera monitor flashed. First, a brief interference, then a sequence of gaps in the image. The shadowy figure was still there, fixed, immobile. But something had changed. The light inside the cabin flickered one last time, and when it stabilized, the figure had disappeared. My heart leapt violently. My mind tried to rationalize. Perhaps the system failure had corrupted the camera display, but I knew it wasn't that. Something inside me, a primal, suffocating instinct, told me that whatever was there was now somewhere else. The operator spoke. Into the radio, his voice choked. Did you see that? Yes. My voice came out low, dry. The camera is still transmitting, but... He paused, as if he didn't want to say the words out loud. The door opened. On the monitor, the image was strange. Something was wrong. The pixels flickered as if there was a void beyond the metal doors. No recognizable corridor, no office lights, nothing at all. Just a static space. I should sound the alarm. It was the correct procedure, but the system seemed anesthetized. No. Alert went off. No automatic notification appeared on the control screen. It was as if the building itself refused to recognize that floor. My body was tense. Instinct told me not to go there, to stay where I was and simply close the monitor. Turn everything off. Forget what I'd seen. But I knew I couldn't, because the elevator door had opened, and whatever was inside was no longer in the car. I needed to find out where I was now. The elevator remained stationary on the 13th floor. On the control panel, the number glowed annoyingly, like an error that refused to be corrected. I should just ignore it. Pretend I hadn't seen anything, call someone higher up and end my shift as if nothing had happened. But something was wrong. Something that was seeping into the back of my mind, pressing down, suffocating. I swallowed, left the security room and headed down the corridor to the elevator. The building was silent, so silent that I could hear the echo of my own footsteps. My hands were cold and sweaty when I pressed the button to call the elevator. The light blinked once before the doors slid aside. The inside of the cabin was empty. The shadowy silhouette that had once occupied the space was gone. But the feeling that I wasn't alone remained. I entered hesitantly and turned my body to face the dashboard. The 13th floor button was still on, as if waiting for me. I took a deep breath and pressed it. The doors closed. The elevator went up with a dry jolt. When the doors opened again, my lungs froze. In front of me was no ordinary corporate building corridor. There were no office doors, glass partitions, or sober carpets. What was there was impossible. The corridor stretched in a straight line, too narrow and long to exist inside the building. The lights flickered faintly, casting shadows that seemed to stretch and contract in an unnatural way. The very structure of the place seemed wrong. The walls were made of something that resembled concrete, but their texture was slightly uneven, organic, as if there was a subtle pulsation beneath their surface. A smell filled the air, something familiar, metallic, slightly rusty. Blood. The scent triggered a reflex deep inside me, a memory buried in the past that I didn't want to revisit. A childhood memory. A door ajar. A dark puddle on the tiled floor. The strong, ferrous smell in the air. My breathing became irregular. The corridor stretched out in front of me, and something inside it was waiting. I should go back. Press the first floor button and get out, but my body didn't move, because coming from the end of that endless corridor, a sound echoed, a drawn-out whisper, calling my name. My footsteps echoed down the corridor as I advanced hesitantly. With each step, I felt as if the floor was stretching out, dragging me further away from the elevator. The space around me seemed to bend in a subtle, almost imperceptible way, as if the building was breathing. The smell of blood permeated the air, thick, metallic, awakening a deep unease within me. The texture of the walls, strangely organic, seemed to vibrate with something I couldn't name. My instinct screamed at me to stop, to go back, but my legs kept moving, as if I wasn't in full control of my own body. Then the radio squawked. This time, it wasn't static. It was a voice. My name was whispered from the other side, slurred, distorted, but incredibly clear. My chest tightened. My first reflex was to reach for the radio attached to my uniform. "Who's on the line?" The only answer was more static. I turned around, my body tense, my eyes scanning the space around me. The corridor was still empty. Nothing but the elongated shadows dancing under the unstable lights. The elevator was still there, its doors open as a possible exit. But the light inside flickered violently, and for an instant, he was there again. The figure, immobile in the middle of the cabin, as if it had never left. My lungs stopped. The light flickered one last time and he was gone. I felt something cold run down my spine. I was being watched. The radio squawked again and the voice came back. Now behind me. You've come. My vision blurred for a second. My whole body stiffened. Survival instinct screamed in my chest, pushing me backwards, towards the elevator, towards anything other than that impossible corridor. But before I could react, the lights flickered one last time, and something moved in the darkness in front of me. The corridor seemed to close in around me, the shadows stretching out as if they wanted to grab me. My heart was pounding and my breathing was irregular. Every fiber of my body was screaming at me to run back to the elevator, to get out of there as quickly as possible. But something, a force I couldn't understand, kept me moving forward. The metallic smell in the air grew stronger. The pulsating texture of the walls seemed to breathe along with me. I didn't want to touch those surfaces. I didn't want to find out what exactly was on them. But the corridor pulled me forward, as if something was waiting for me at the end. And then I arrived. The darkness ended abruptly. In front of me, where there should have been a wall or perhaps a door, there was a giant mirror. My image was reflected there, but something was wrong. It wasn't just the poor lighting or the dirty glass. My reflection wasn't exactly me. The eyes looked empty, too deep, as if they had been hollowed out from the inside. The skin was slightly off, as if it wasn't really mine. The mouth was clenched in a tense line, and then it moved. My reflex opened my mouth, but I didn't move, and then the voice came from inside the mirror. You took your time. I took a step back, panic pulsing through my veins. The reflection smiled, a smile that wasn't mine. It knew something I didn't. My hands were shaking. My head was spinning. Every instinct inside me told me that this wasn't possible, that I shouldn't be there. The glass began to shake slightly, and then something inside the mirror moved. A dark, distorted shadow came out of me, growing, taking shape behind my reflection. I tried to run, but my reflection didn't. It stood there, motionless, with that frozen smile watching me run away. The sun had already risen when I finally left the building. I walked out like a man who had woken up from a nightmare, but my body still carried the weight of that night. Every step felt unreal, as if I no longer fully belonged to the world I knew. My thoughts were in chaos. I remembered the elevator. I remembered the impossible corridor. I remembered the smell of blood and the living texture of the walls. But above all, I remembered the mirror, my reflection, the smile that wasn't mine. When I got off shift, I stopped by the building operator's office. I needed some confirmation, something to tell me that it hadn't been a delusion, an illusion created by tiredness or the exhaustion of an endless night. But the operator's confused expression made my stomach turn. What's wrong? I asked, already sensing that I wouldn't like the answer. He frowned and turned the computer screen towards me. There were no records of activity in the elevator tonight. No faults, no abnormal movements. My mouth went dry. That's not possible. I know it's not possible, but look. He typed a few commands into the keyboard. The system shows no 13th floor. There's never been one here. I felt a shiver run up my spine. How could that be? I'd been there. I had seen it, felt it, heard it. I knew that place existed. But in front of me, the computer screen told me that I had never left the security room. No record of a button being pressed, no video from the cameras, no error in the system, just silence, just silence. I left without saying another word, but the fear didn't stay behind. It came with me. I couldn't sleep properly for days. Every time I closed my eyes, I dreamt of the corridor. It stretched on and on as if it were calling me back. The metallic smell in the air, the shadows pulsing on the walls. But the worst was when I looked in the mirror of my own apartment. I approached it slowly, looking at my own face. Every stroke was right. Every detail seemed in place. Until my mouth moved all by itself and the smile that formed wasn't mine.